What is going on, Notre Dame fans? Mike Singer from blueandgold.com here with my senior editor at Blue and Gold, Lou Somogyi. We are glad to be back with a fresh episode of the Irish Huddle. We missed you guys last week. A lot going on, and I had to cancel last week's episode of Irish Huddle. We also had to cancel the Pod Like a Champion for this week, but for our podcast audience, we've been putting up our interviews with Sean and Darren at WSBT Weekly Sports Beat. So you can find me every, Monday. I'm talking recruiting on there, and Lou is every Wednesday evening. If you're not able to catch that live, we post it that night on our YouTube channel, podcast channel. Of course, we're on YouTube as well. We're everywhere. Go to blueandgold.com for all of your Notre Dame football coverage. Our YouTube page, search Blue and Gold Illustrated on YouTube. You can find us there as well. So Notre Dame is through 9 spring practices, Lou. Is it we did that whole series going through each position group and for a month or so, and almost through spring ball already. Is it gone by fast to you as well?
They always go fast, and the older you get, the faster they go. You'll find that out.
Absolutely. So, looking forward to today's show here. We're going to be, our Irish Huddle a couple weeks ago, we kind of focused on the offensive line, and we'll talk some O-line later in the show, but we're going to definitely talk some defensive line earlier today on Thursday, April 15th. Recruiting coordinator and defensive line coach Mike Elston spoke with the media, and we're going to touch on a couple. We're going to hear from him and replay some things he said about Myron Tagovailoa-Amosa and Riley Mills. So we'll go ahead and hear from Mike Elston.
Myron's doing great. You know, the move for him has been very beneficial. He's trimmed down and leaned out in his weight, and looks really good with speed and agility off the edge. Probably the most productive guy right now up to this point throughout spring. He and the nose guard position between Kurt Heinisch and Howard Cross and Aiden Keona-Aina, those guys, those 4 guys have been, super productive and very, very disruptive. In terms of Riley's progressing, doing a nice job. We've got him, like you asked the third part of the question, he's cross training and doing some different things, but progressing well and doing a nice job.
So that's what he had to say about Myron Tagovailoa-Amosa and Riley Mills. Fast forward here, he talked about Howard Cross, and let's hear what Mike Elston had to say about Cross. I know that you thought these were some intriguing comments.
Getting a lot of work done with him, even though he's not on the field. But Howard Cross is just a dynamic, like, accelerator, just speed off the ball, low pad level. He finds ways into creases and gaps, and he's always in the backfield, and he's quick with his hands, and he's got good speed, and he's got really good agility. He's been a load to block. I mean, he's going to have a breakout season. I'm excited for him, and it's been a really fun nose guard position this spring with Kurt, Howard, and Aiden.
So thoughts there, Lou? What kind of stuck out to you in hearing Elston, not only in those clips we just heard from him, but anything else he said on Thursday?
We've been talking so much about the offensive line and the cross training that has been going on there, guys working at various positions, and it really seems to apply a lot as well to the defensive line with Myron moving over to the end position. Riley Mills can work both the tackle and end positions. I would guess Jason Adamalola, and he's talked about Justin Adamalola, to multiple positions. Isaiah Foskey, he talked about he can line up at the Viper, he can line up on the strong side, and he could even move into 3 technique in certain pass run situations. Jordan Botello, we've seen clips of him maybe coming more from the inside as opposed to the edge. So just the flexibility factor there that we have there with so many of the different guys. And the nose guard position also, we didn't mention Jacob Lacey, who 2 years ago, he and Kyle Hamilton were the standouts. Obviously, Kyle stood out a little bit more. He was more conspicuous, but Jacob played quite a bit as a freshman 2 years ago, but he was slowed by a shoulder injury last year, which he had to get cleaned up. And so he's not available this spring, but yet there's three nose tackles he talked about that can certainly do the job. So that position is probably as deep as any as you will find on the team. Howard Cross is just such an intriguing guy because 2 years ago, when he came in, he was listed about 6'1", 256. And, the thought was he was the classic tweener, maybe not quite quick enough for the end position, not quite big enough for the interior. He has really found his niche. And the more Elston talked about him, he sounded a lot like a former nose guard here at Notre Dame, Derek Landry, who played from 2003 to 2006, played about 5, 6 years in the NFL. He too wasn't the biggest guy, about 6'1", 277, but he was so effective at nose guard because he was such a technically sound and smart player, just was able to accelerate, explode off the line, get into the backfield quickly, and just was a problem for centers. And I'm not saying that Cross would be at that level yet, but the sounds of it is that he has those same type of traits or knack for that explosion off the line.
I'm glad you touched on Patelho even lining up. He's a Viper in this Notre Dame defense. We've seen some clips of him and these, Notre Dame sends 3 minutes of each practice to the media. And of course, we're posting videos of that on our YouTube page, also at blueandgold.com. So if you're just a podcast only person, make sure you're checking that out to actually see with your own eyes what's happening at practice, at least from what Notre Dame is sending us. But yeah, you'll see George Patelho lining up in between the nose guard and the strong side end. And there was even a clip today where Patelho and Foskey were opposite each other at defensive end, and they both dropped into coverage. I mean, the word multiple and fluid and cross-training, these aren't just buzzword terms we're throwing out for the heck of it. I mean, this Marcus Freeman defense looks extremely multiple. I mean, we'll get a much better idea of it in the spring game, and then of course against Florida State this fall. But yeah, I mean they're not joking around when they're talking about multiple defense, especially up front.
Yeah. I don't know how much of it we'll really be able to see in the spring game because that's generally about as vanilla as it will get because it will be telecast some, and you don't ever want to give too much of the trade sequence away, and you want the element of surprise, especially with a new coordinator going into a season there, and keep some people guessing. So I don't know if I'd read too much necessarily in the spring game, but I think we can get an idea
Yeah.
there of just how players are going to be positioned and where they're aligning
Yeah.
in certain bases.
Well, Lou, I'm glad you said that because what Notre Dame has been sending to the media, I'm shocked. I mean, I talked to some of my colleagues around the Rivals Network, and I know our Alabama Rivals website has a huge YouTube page, over 50,000 subscribers, and so I watched some of their stuff, and they're just getting Nick Saban walking around and quarterbacks, close up of them throwing, just warming up. I mean, so I've been pleasantly surprised how much we've been getting from the media here. Moving along, Lou, wanted to touch on Mike Elston as the recruiting coordinator because the media asked some questions to him again on Thursday morning about how it's different between him and Brian Polian. We won't play the audio, but can you kind of refresh us refresh us on what Elston had to say?
Yeah, well, Elston had previously been a recruiting coordinator here at Notre Dame from 2015 to 17, and then when you had the massive coaching overhaul after the 2016 season, they made Brian Polian one of the most renowned recruiters in the country. And even under Charlie Weiss, he really made his bones, especially landing Manti Te'o, the National Player of the Year from Hawaii. And he's built such a great relationship on the West Coast. But he was there more kind of like a organizational standpoint as far as getting the roster balance and everything else in order. And now that they have that, they swapped roles where Polian now has the associate head coach title. And Mike Elston said, he learned a lot just in seeing how Brian Polian managed the whole recruiting scape. And now he can use his own specialty, which is kind of creativeness in recruiting, in marketing certain parts, such as you well know, the pot of gold on St. Patty's Day on March 17th, and all the offers that went out there, and hiring, some people inside, Chad Bowden and all, to assist and kind of be like coordinators on offense and defense in the recruiting efforts there, so that way a lot of the legwork and grunt work can be done by them, and then the creativity juices of closing and other things such as the pot of gold can be implemented by Mike Elston. And you would actually have a better knowledge of this, Mike, being a recruiting insider.
Yeah, I think, sometimes I can be a wet blanket when things are too exciting in recruiting. I'm like, well, let's, it's the truth is somewhere in between. Or if everyone thinks things are down in the dumps for Notre Dame in recruiting, I'm like, well, here's why things are better. So I'm typically, pretty, at least in my opinion, a little level-headed in this. So I say that because, there's just such a recruiting high right now for, how Notre Dame's recruiting right now with Mike Elston and Marcus Freeman, and Chad Bowden, who you mentioned, is doing a really good job with daily contact with some of these defensive prospects. But I feel like Notre Dame fans are now kind of looking back to the Brian Polian days as, those stunk. Why weren't they doing that then? Whenever there's something new and fresh and new ideas coming in, it's gonna be better. People are gonna, or it seems a lot better. Let's see what this looks like in 2 years. How does this pot of gold pay off? Like, is there any commitments, from that group? Like, I will say it was a huge day. I actually tweeted out at the end of St. Patrick's Day that it felt like National Signing Day, and Elston said that in his press conference today as well. I remember that day, and it's just like, there was so much excitement, so much reporting. I mean, the Notre Dame won St. Patrick's Day. They have a built-in holiday for Notre Dame. They absolutely should be doing a lot more than tweeting out saying Happy St. Patrick's Day. Like, they used that very, very well. They had at that point, this, in the middle of March, St. Patrick's Day, they had offered about 30 2023 prospects, and Brian Kelly, or a Notre Dame assistant, had contact with basically all of them. Maybe there's a couple that they had offered early that they didn't have any contact with on that day because they're kind of, backing off there. But probably 95% of the kids they'd already offered at that point, they had contact with. And then they offered about 30 other prospects in a single day. I mean, if Notre Dame offered 30 kids in a month, you'd be like, wow, that's an offer a day. Like, that's a really busy month for Notre Dame recruiting. They offered 30 in a day. And then you had Joshua Burnham commit that day, also his birthday, linebacker in the 2022 class. I mean, what Notre Dame did on social media was neat with there's some social media viral dance that all the coaches were doing, and they looked goofy, and Brian Kelly, and it was goofy. And, I'm sure if, some of our older folk listening, and you watched that on Twitter, maybe you thought that was, something you didn't really care for. But the kids love that stuff. I've asked them, like, they loved it. Notre Dame needs to win those recruits over to think Notre Dame is cool, a lot more than the diehard Notre Dame fans, because you're not going anywhere. So, the Irish have to win those kids. But it was a big day. And one more thing I want to touch on is, kind of the difference between Elston and Polian, at least in my mind, as the recruiting coordinator, is, I think if those two guys were one person, they would be the perfect recruiting coordinator. Because, like you mentioned, Polian was so great in the roster management, scouting, that kind of angle as a recruiting coordinator, and did a nice job as a closer. I put in my vote for who Notre Dame's rep was going to be in Rivals' top 25 recruiters for this past recruiting cycle. I said Polian over Jeff Quinn. Jeff Quinn assembled a very good offensive line class, but I said Polian because how he helped manage this recruiting class for Notre Dame during the pandemic. He was the secondary recruiter for basically everyone in the class, if not the primary recruiter for some of the guys, especially on the defensive side of the ball in the secondary. He had a big hand in. So Polian, very good kind of in that aspect, but where he might not have been as strong as Elston now is these big creative ideas, the pot of gold, what they're doing on social media, and upcoming things that Notre Dame has scheduled. I think what we'll see here in the next couple days is these recruits who are taking official visits to Notre Dame in June are going to start tweeting out little graphics sent to them by Notre Dame with their official visit date, and the kids love that stuff. So yeah, it's exciting time for Notre Dame recruiting right now. Marcus Freeman, Chris O'Leary, safeties coach, is doing a nice job. Cornerbacks coach Mike Mickens, offensive side of the ball, Reese, Taylor, Alexander, McNulty, Quinn. Whole staff I feel like is Brian Kelly. You know, all these guys are doing a really nice job. But I just don't want, folks to now think that the Polian days as recruiting coordinator was an absolute joke. It was like, how could they have done things that way? Because they signed some pretty darn good classes then too.
You learn very fast, Grasshopper. You really do a great job with that, as understanding at a young age that anytime there's change, automatically what was previously stunk when it probably really didn't. And just because something is new doesn't always mean it's better. Hopefully it is in this case.
Sure.
And, we're seeing that even with Marcus Freeman. Look, the last 3 years under Clark Lee as defensive coordinator, that's the first time since 1969 through 71 where Notre Dame finished 3 straight years in the top 15 in scoring defense. So, there wasn't a bad job being done there, and it's going to be a tough act to follow.
Yeah, we'll see on the results how Marcus Freeman's defenses, these guys he signs in this class, how they stack up, compared to Clark Lee's. But one thing I can 1,000% say with certainty right now is, Clark Lee just was not a day-to-day recruiter. Like I said that before, say it now. Like he just was not. Marcus Freeman lives and breathes recruiting. So again, we'll see on the results, but the kind of the I don't want to say effort, but I guess you can. A lot different. Let's transition, Lou, into talking about the offensive line, because I think that's kind of the biggest storyline, at least in my opinion, kind of this spring, the Rubik's Cube that you've said so many times, and what that looks like. What's kind of your thoughts on that position? And I just want to have a disclaimer out there. What we're talking about here is just 3 minutes of practice footage that Notre Dame sends to the media, and you can kind of piece together, well, this looks like the first team, this looks more like second team, this third team. Well, you have Michael Carmody here at right tackle, and then he's at center, and I think he's even been at left tackle a little bit. So we're just kind of piecing this together from what the breadcrumbs we get. So kind of your thoughts in seeing these videos and what you're thinking about the offensive line.
Well, I think if we're waiting for an answer from Brian Kelly after the spring game on May 1st, that, okay, we got our offensive line ready to go and said, you're going to be a little bit disappointed, because this is something that I anticipate will go very much into August and maybe into the season as well, because the unknown factor is, where will Jaret Patterson fit into the mix? I think as we entered the spring, and maybe even after the first few practices or through the first half of spring, I think we were sensing, okay, Zeke Corral is going to be the center. That's a fait accompli, and Jaret Patterson will likely move out to tackle. That can still be the case, but I think Brian Kelly was genuine, and when he talked this past weekend about, this is not a situation that's totally resolved here, because we know we can put Jaret Patterson back at center, and we know we're going to get one of the best in the country there. We don't necessarily know that with Zeke Corral. So the question is now, who are the best 5 there? And that could be both Tosh Baker and Blake Fisher at the left tackle spot. And then you have Josh Lugg at right tackle, who could still move to the inside. Andrew Kristofic has been all over the place. Quinn Carroll has been, both at the left on the right side at
Yep.
tackle as well as at guard. And Corral has been working exclusively at center. So that's likely his future. But that doesn't automatically guarantee that he's going to be the starter there, because that competition is very much alive. And that's what Brian Kelly said. He wants to keep that going as well. So until they find really, okay, where is Jaret Patterson going to settle in August or over the summer, I don't think we're going to be getting clear-cut answers there. Another thing that could happen, Mike, is back in 2017, you had a co-starting situation at right tackle with a sophomore, Tommy Kramer, and a true freshman, early entrant with Robert Hainsey. They split time. After every second possession, they would come in. And I think Hainsey ended up with like 480 snaps for the season and Kramer 460. You usually don't like to see that on the offensive line, but that's what transpired. And I could see the same happening potentially with Baker and Fisher on the left side if one doesn't move to another position. Rocco Spindler, you just showed him up there. We've seen him regularly taking the reps with the first unit. Now, Dylan Gibbons, a fifth-year senior, he could be a factor there as well. But there is just so much to sort out, and I just don't see it happening in 15 spring practices. I think this is more so like just a prelude or a warm-up to, okay, let's try to get resolution as to where they best align, and then go from there as the summer with conditioning and everything else, and going into training camp in August, see how that goes.
Yeah, for YouTube audience, we have Dylan Gibbons pulled up on the page. I totally forgot he went to Clearwater Central Catholic. That is about 10 minutes from where I grew up when I lived in Clearwater, Florida. So forgot about that. Side note, do you want to speculate a little bit, Lou? I know it's not your favorite thing. You want to play some speculation?
Well, I think I sort of did there, where I could see the left side being
let's make a starting five right now. We'll include Jaret Patterson.
Oh man, there's no way. And anyone who could get the starting lineup right here correct on April 15th for the offensive line, that's like winning the lottery with all the different combinations and numbers you could see.
Yeah.
If I had to guess, I think they'd like to keep Blake and Tosh on the left side, and maybe they do have that type of rotation that they had with Hainsey and Kramer. Left guard, I think we would start off with Dylan Gibbons there, but I could see, Rocco Spindler getting into the mix there as well. Let's go with Zeke Corral at center for now, and then we'll go with Josh Lugg at the right guard position, and then perhaps there Jaret Patterson would be at right tackle. We could see right tackle Jaret Patterson as the starting center, and Lugg, and then maybe Quinn Carroll over on the right side, or Andrew Kristofic would be the starter at either of the guard spots. It's so wide open. It's the number of combinations that you could have there. And, look, Carmody's been playing virtually every position. I think he's going to be the future Josh Lugg.
Sure.
That Swiss Army knife who could maybe fill in just about anywhere along the line.
I like that. One thing that's interesting to me is Brian Kelly seemed pretty darn adamant that Josh Lugg was going to be a guard, right? I mean, when I think he maybe said that after his first,
yeah.
Yeah, so that would have been after the first practice. He seemed pretty confident. So part of me is like, one, he's 6'6" and 7/8, so it'd be kind of strange if Lugg was a guard and he's got some good length to him at that size as a guard, and then Jaret Patterson is 6'4.5". I mean, the dude's almost got 3 inches of height on. So typically your longer, taller guys are the tackle, and maybe you're the stockier guys inside. So that was an interesting. But if Lugg is definitely going to be a guard, why the heck is he getting all these right tackle reps? Why don't you slide him inside and get some other guys work there if he's definitely not going to play that position? That was kind of, so maybe Lugg is not a shoe-in for a guard.
Yeah.
Personally,
Yeah,
I like. Go ahead, Luke.
maybe he is taking some reps and we don't see it
Right.
on the tape there like that. Like she said, it's only 3 minutes worth, and Luck's taking reps. He started at guard a game last year. He started a game at center. He started the last 5 games in 2019 at right tackle when Robert Hainsey was injured. So, like we said, anyone who can figure out who the starting 5 will be
Probably
for
named
that
Jeff Quinn or Brian Kelly, right?
yeah.
Yeah,
And I look, and I don't want to leave out another scene, John Dirksen, who's been in the mix as well.
yeah.
It's just so many different combinations that you can look at.
Yeah, and it's fun. And for those who maybe don't care about the big uglies as much as Lou and I do, we'll have a talk about some skill players in a future pod. But yeah, as far as your projected O line, I think, man, it would just be so hard for me to see a true freshman starting offensive lineman. Of course, you've talked about there's some precedent, but that battle between Fisher and Baker seems real on the left sideline. I do think it's going to be one of those two guys. Left guard, yeah, it's certainly fascinating.
And Mike, I would generally not include freshmen at all because since 2008 through 2020, I'm not including this year, but there were 45 offensive linemen recruited in that 13 years. 42 of them, out of those 45, were redshirted as freshmen. The 3 who weren't all ended up starting some. The first was Trevor Robinson in 2008, 3 games, I believe. Next was Steve Elmer in 2013, started, I think, 3 or 4 games at tackle. And then, of course, we mentioned Robert Hainsey, who started 4 games but split time with Tommy Crimmon. All 3 of those guys were early entries. They enrolled in January, went through the 15 spring practices. You haven't had that many guys do that along the offensive line. And because both Blake Fisher and Rocco Spindler are also early entries, as is Caleb Johnson, let's not forget him as well. But because they're early entrants, and we have seen them regularly interspersed with that first unit, it would not surprise me. Maybe not for the opener, maybe not even midseason, but it would not surprise me if they become regulars in that lineup as freshmen.
So you're telling me there's a chance?
More than a chance.
Dumb and Dumber line, greatest movie of all time. All right, well, I think that wraps up this episode of the Irish Huddle. Promise next week we'll dive a little bit more into talking about what we've seen and give some thoughts on some other positions. There are some guys that I'm really excited to talk about. But in the meantime, go to Blue and Gold Illustrated on YouTube if you are not there yet. Go to blueandgold.com for all of your Notre Dame football coverage. Follow us on Twitter. At BGI News is the place to find all of our stuff there on Twitter. Appreciate you guys listening or watching this episode of the Irish Huddle. You have a great rest of your day and have a great upcoming weekend.